The distress beacon died with a pathetic whimper, its final pulse swallowed by the void. Evan watched the indicator light fade to black, then turned to survey what remained of Outpost Kepler 7, a graveyard of alien technology and broken dreams. 3 days ago, the evacuation shuttles had left without him. Commander Reeves had made the call. The station's reactor was failing, and they couldn't wait for one missing engineer. Evan had been in the deep maintenance shafts, trying to save the very systems that had betrayed them. By the time he'd climbed back to the docking bay, he'd found only empty berths and the fading heat signatures of departed vessels. They'd left him to die on a station built by the HFY, a species whose technology humanity barely understood. A station now hemorrhaging atmosphere, its power grid in cascading failure, its life support gasping its last breaths. Evan should have panicked, should have raged, should have curled up and waited for the cold embrace of space. Instead, he got to work. The HFY had built Kepler 7 400 years ago, before their civilization collapsed into mystery. Their engineering was elegant, crystalline, and utterly alien. Human technicians had maintained it for the past decade with a combination of desperation and duct tape, never truly comprehending the underlying principles. But Evan was different. Where others saw inscrutable alien mechanisms, he saw patterns, problems, puzzles, begging to be solved. He started in the reactor core, where the HFY's quantum-entangled power cells were unraveling. The standard human approach was to stabilize them with electromagnetic dampeners, a crude bandage that fought against the technology's nature. Evan took a different approach. He watched. He listened to the harmonics of failing containment fields, and then he understood. The HFY technology didn't need to be restrained. It needed to be conducted, like music. Evan ripped out the human modifications, those desperate jury rigs that had been slowly strangling the station. He reconfigured the power distribution network according to what he could only describe as aesthetic principles. The alien systems wanted to flow in spirals, in geometric fractals, in patterns that reminded him of snowflakes and seashells. When he reconnected the reactor, it hummed. Not the grinding, tortured sound humans had learned to tolerate, but a clear, almost musical tone. Power flooded back into dormant systems. Lights flickered to life in sectors that had been dark for years. The life support was next. The HFY breathed methane and ammonia wildly different from human requirements. The human engineering team had installed their own atmospheric processors, bulky machines that fought constantly against the station's original environmental systems. Evan spent 18 hours in the environmental center, rebuilding. He didn't replace the HFY systems. He taught them to speak a new language. By the end, the station was producing oxygen with an efficiency that would make Earth's best engineers weep. And it was doing so using HFY technology that had been there all along, just waiting for someone to ask the right questions. Days blurred together. Evan slept in 3-hour bursts, ate from the emergency rations he'd found scattered across the station, and worked with a focus that bordered on possession. He rebuilt navigation. He restored communications. He brought weapons systems back online, systems the human crew had never even known existed. On the 14th day, as Evan was optimizing the station's gravitational stabilizers, the proximity alarms sang out. A ship was approaching. Evan pulled up the sensors that now functioned better than they had in a century. The vessel was Korvath, one of the predatory species that had been harassing human settlements along the frontier. They must have seen the station's evacuation, smelled easy salvage. The Korvath were in for a surprise. Evan's fingers flew across the crystalline interface. The HFY had built Kepler 7 as a way station. Yes, but also as a fortress. Its weapons had been dormant, their firing solutions lost to time. But Evan had found them, understood them, awakened them. The Korvath ship opened fire, expecting no resistance from a dead station. Instead, Kepler 7 responded with defensive arrays that bent space itself, redirecting the plasma bursts back at their source. The alien raiders barely had time to realize their mistake before a lance of coherent gravitational force, a weapon that shouldn't exist outside of theoretical physics, reduced their vessel to expanding debris. That's when the second ship arrived. This one human. This one broadcasting rescue frequencies. Dr. Susan Reeves, the commander's daughter and the expedition's chief xenotechnologist, stared at the sensor readings from her shuttle's cockpit. They made no sense. Kepler-7 was supposed to be dead. Instead, it was radiating power signatures that exceeded its original specifications by orders of magnitude. Outpost Kepler-7. This is Rescue Shuttle Prometheus. We're reading impossible energy levels. Please identify yourself. There was a pause. Then a familiar voice, rough with exhaustion but alive with something else, triumph, perhaps, or vindication. Prometheus, this is Engineer Evan Cross. Welcome back to Kepler-7. She's running a bit better than when you left. Susan's shuttle docked with a station that bore little resemblance to the failing outpost she'd evacuated from. Lights shimmered in colors that human eyes struggled to process. The air itself seemed to hum with vitality. And at the center of it all stood Evan, covered in grime and grease, grinning like he'd just won an argument with the universe itself. How? Susan breathed, her scientific mind reeling. The reactor was failing. The life support was compromised. This station was dying. Evan gestured to the crystalline walls around them, which now pulsed with gentle bioluminescence. It was never dying. We were just killing it slowly, trying to make it something it wasn't. I stopped fighting the station and started listening to it. Turns out, the Xviri were better engineers than we gave them credit for, and humans. He paused, that grin widening. Humans are pretty good at learning. Oh. Susan would spend the next year studying what Evan had done, writing papers that would revolutionize humanity's approach to xenotechnology. The military would dissect his innovations, transforming human defensive capabilities. Engineers across the galaxy would learn from his methods, but none of that mattered in that moment. In that moment, Susan saw only the human element of the HFY genre, made manifest not the capacity for violence or conquest, but something more profound, the ability to adapt, to learn, to refuse to die, even when the universe itself seemed to demand it. You know, Susan said finally, they left you here to die. Evan looked around at the station he'd resurrected, at technology that sang with purpose, at systems running in harmony for the first time in centuries. Yeah, he agreed. Best thing that ever happened to me. Outside, the stars wheeled in their ancient dance, and Kepler-7, that marvel of Xviri engineering, awakened by human stubbornness, stood watch over the void, a monument to what happens when you leave a human engineer alone with a problem. They don't give up. They don't surrender. They rebuild the world,